Okay, now, hopefully that, the last 1 hour and 20 minutes, hopefully that has set the scene. Because it's very important that the scene is set here before we continue. Because in order for us to do this analysis, this logic analysis, that's going to be aimed at getting as close to the truth as possible. Remember, folks, we don't have all the details. We don't. There are a select few people who have access to all the details. We can only use our logic. How are we going to use our logic? Well, let me just recap. What did I set out before we went to the article? The dynamic that we have here is, over here we have the accusers who are fueling all of these charges against the Tates. Remember, charges are nothing other than allegations. They are not evidence of proof, they are not evidence of guilt, they are not evidence of a crime. They are just someone's opinion as to what has happened at some stage between 2010 and 2016 in the UK. Okay, in order for this to be cross-examined, obviously, the evidence supporting the accusation needs to be brought to court. And then, before a judge, before a jury, okay, we're going to find out what the judge and jury says. The evidence is going to be cross-examined. Okay, so over here, we have the accusers. Who are the accusers? Women. We've got a bunch of women accusing Andrew and Tristan Tate of a whole bunch of shit. Okay, so we have the accusers over here. Over here, we have the accused. Who are the accused? Andrew and Tristan Tate. Now, there's something extremely important that we need to touch on here. What did I say 20 minutes ago? The last thing you want to do is to get your information secondhand. Don't listen to a political commentator. Don't read a fucking mainstream media article and take that as the raw, unfiltered truth. Don't read an alternative media article. Don't just depend on other people to give you the information and tell you what to think because you're fucking lazy. Because that's what lazy people do. Lazy people want other people to tell them what to think. That is the last thing you should be doing if you're looking to get to the truth of some matter that you have on hand here. What are we trying to do? We're trying to figure out who is likely telling the truth. Are the accusers telling the truth, or are the accused telling the truth? That's what we're trying to figure out here. Who is likely? If we were to look at this from a probability standpoint, who is likely to be telling the truth? In order to come to the most informed conclusions with regards to the truth, you cannot afford to get your information secondhand. Because when you get information secondhand, you are taking information that has passed through the biased filter of someone else. And you don't want all of the distorted, biased, slanted takes on this story being injected into your worldview, into your analysis of this entire thing. No. How do we avoid this? We avoid this by going straight to the sources. We go straight to the accusers. We go straight to the accused. That's what we do. And what we do is we're going to do 4 things. We're going to listen to what they say. We're going to watch very carefully how they deliver their words. We're going to analyze their body language very carefully, because the delivery is just as important, if not more important, than what someone says. So we're going to watch, we're going to listen to what they say. So we're going to cross-examine their logic through their words. We're going to watch how they deliver it. How credible is their body language? We're going to analyze their physical appearance, in particular, their facial appearance, because judging a book by its cover is very important. This crap that you hear about never judge a book by its cover is exactly what it is, crap. You can tell a lot by looking at someone's face. Certain people have facial complexions that are more trustworthy and less trustworthy. Some people have facial complexions that suggest testosterone, disagreeableness, narcissism. Other people have faces that are slimy and rat-like and are not to be trusted. We all know this. So we want to analyze the physical appearance of the sources. And then fourthly and finally, we want to run a background check on our direct sources of information, the accused and the accusers. Why is this important? Well, we need to know what sort of a track record, what sort of a history the people have. Are the accusers, do they have a track record for false allegations? That would be very important to know. If you've got a bunch of accusers accusing Andrew and Tristan Tate of sexual crimes, but they have a history of false allegations, that would be extremely important to know. Likewise, if we analyse the track record of the accused and they have a fucking litany of criminal convictions, well, that tells us something interesting about them as well. Okay. Now, this is where the Andrew and Tristan Tate case gets super interesting. Because the way it's set up, folks, let me explain how it's set up. And for those of you who have been paying attention to this story, you will be familiar perhaps with what it is that I'm going to say. In order to do a logic analysis, like we're trying to do now, what do you need? What do you need? In order to analyze the sources, the accused and the accusers, you need to know who they are. If you don't know who they are, how can you analyze their words if they're not speaking? How can you analyze the delivery of their words and their body language if you don't know who they are and you can't see them? How do you analyze their facial complexion? In other words, how do you judge the cover of their book if you can't see them and you don't know who they are? How do you run a background check on them if you don't know who they are? Let's have a look at this. Let's have a look at the accused. Who are the accused? Andrew and Tristan Tate. Okay, so I'm like anyone, folks. I don't want to get my information secondhand because I don't want the information passing through the biased filter of some fucking political commentator or mainstream or alternative media outlet. Okay, so I'm always going to go directly to the sources. Okay, so who's the accused? Andrew and Tristan Tate. So what am I going to do? I'm going to go straight to Andrew and Tristan Tate's content. And what do you think I'm going to do? I'm going to listen to what they say. I'm going to watch how they deliver what it is that they're saying, analyze their body language. I'm going to have a look at their facial complexion. I'm going to analyze the cover of the book and see what the cover of the book is telling me. And because I know who Andrew and Tristan Tate are, I can run a background check on them. Are they criminals? What's their past history? What sort of industries are they involved in? Who do they do their business with? Who do they associate with in this world? What are their views on certain topics? I can do a background check. So what do you think I did? Whenever I started to become aware of this entire Andrew Tristan Tate case in Romania and beyond, what do you think I did? Well, I went straight to the source of the accused because Andrew and Tristan Tate are being accused of some very serious stuff. I'm a fair man. So I went and consumed a whole bunch of Andrew and Tristan Tate's content. I heard them explaining the case, explaining their innocence in their own words. I watched them deliver it, I analysed the cover of their book, and then I went and did some extra due diligence and looked at their track record in this life and analysed what it is that they've been doing up until this point in their life. Okay, fantastic. So by the time I had finished cross-examining the source that we're going to call the accused, Andrew and Tristan Tate, I had a very, very good understanding of their interpretation of what is happening. I had an excellent understanding because they've made it very clear what it is that they think is happening. Now, whether I agree or disagree, that's not what we're talking about here at the moment. But what I was able to do is I was able to use the internet and I was able to come to an extremely informed conclusion about what it is that Andrew and Tristan Tate think about the current legal action and case that's been taken and charges that are being launched against them. Okay, so I now have Andrew and Tristan Tate's version of events. Fantastic. What's the golden rule, folks? You always get both sides of the story. So I've went and got Andrew and Tristan's side of the story, and I've analysed it extensively, using the 4 categories. Analysing their words, so what are they saying? How coherent, how consistent is their narrative that they're telling me through their words? That's number 1. Number 2, I physically watched them. I haven't just listened to them on a podcast with fucking headphones. No, I've got them up on screen and I have analysed them as they've been delivering their narrative, their version of events. So I've got to analyse their body language. I've got to analyse how they interact with the interviewer or the questioner. And I've got to see the back and forth. So I've got a feeling for how they're delivering the information. How truthful or deceptive do they seem in the delivery of their information? Okay. Number 3, because I can see them, because there are images of them all over the internet, I can analyse the cover of their book. I can analyse their face. Do they look trustworthy? Do they look slimy? Do they look disagreeable? Do they look narcissistic? Do they look like liars? I can just run a basic analysis of the cover of their book. Okay, that's number 3. And number 4, because I know who the accused are, Andrew and Tristan Tate, what can I now do? I can run a background check on them. Well, okay, are they criminals? Have they a criminal record? Have they any past history of human trafficking, rape, sexual assault, beating women, imprisoning women against their will, forcing them, exploiting them, into pornographic acts? Have they any criminal convictions for these activities in the past? I was able to dive down into that. Do they have a criminal record? Well, I was able to do a background check. Fantastic. I have a very clear side of argument from Tristan and Andrew. I know what their side of the argument is. I know what it is that they think. I know their version of events. Fantastic. Okay. So what's the next logical step that I need to take? Well, I need to cross-reference what they are saying with the accusers, obviously. Because what are we doing here, folks? We are cross-examining the accused and the accusers because we're looking to see who appears most credible. That's what we're doing here. Who is making the most sense? Who sounds like they're making the most sense? Who looks like they're making the most sense? Whose track record suggests that they are being most truthful? So, in order for me to truly contextualize Andrew and Tristan's version, I need to get the version of the accusers. In other words, I now need to cross-examine the women who are accusing Andrew and Tristan Tate. But now we hit a stumbling block, folks. Because you know the stumbling block that we now hit? Anonymity. Oh, well, isn't that convenient? Isn't that convenient? So Andrew and Tristan Tate, they get their faces plastered all over the media, all over the internet, and they get all of these heinous allegations attached to their name and reputation. But when we try to cross-examine the accusers, the women, We don't know who they are. Bananas in fucking pajamas. Bananas in pajamas is all I can say to that. Folks, logic tells you, in a fair and just world, if you are going to publicly name the accused, then obviously the accusers should be publicly named and identified as well. That's only fair, for the exact reason that I'm saying. If you're going to publicly name the accused, who has all of the heinous allegations attached to their name, well, for the public to run a fair analysis, we need to be able to cross-reference the version of Andrew and Tristan Tate with the version of the accusers, i.e. the women. Oh, but fancy that. We don't know who the women are. We don't know what they look like. We don't know what they sound like. We don't know what they're saying. We haven't been able to cross-examine their narrative. Because we don't know what they look like, we can't judge the book by its cover. And because we don't know who they are, we cannot run a background check on them. Convenient, that, isn't it? So, isn't that funny, folks? We want to try and run, as a member of the public watching this unfold. It's very obvious, folks. If you're going to name and shame the accused, then you should be naming and making public the accusers. And you see, if you want to keep the accusers anonymous, then logic, fairness, and justice would tell you that the names of the accused should remain anonymous as well. In other words, it should be a level playing field until the accused and the accusers get their day in court and a verdict is reached. Only then should there be publicity. Only then should there be a revelation, should the faces and the names be revealed. That's what fairness and justice would say. A level playing field. It should be as much a level playing field for the accused as for the accusers. If you're going to make a serious allegation against someone, sex crime, it doesn't get much worse than that. And better still, sex crime against minors, doesn't get much worse than that, folks. If you're a man, I can't think of anything worse to be attached to your reputation than a sex crime against a minor. Doesn't get worse than that. So if you're going to make a fucking allegation like that, then there's one of two options. Either everyone remains anonymous, the accused and the accusers, just in case there's a false allegation, it goes without saying, just in case the evidence of the accusation doesn't meet the critical threshold for acceptable evidence. Because if that happens, well then nobody's reputation has been damaged. And the accuser who has made the false allegation should then face the full force of the law. And then likewise, folks, if you're going to name and make public the accused, well, obviously the accusers have to be made public as well. What has happened here, though? Oh no, that has not happened. Andrew and Tristan Tate, they have had the heinous allegations, the heinous charges attached to their name and reputation, but nobody knows who the women are. And folks, if you don't know who the women are, then that means you can't cross-examine them. And that raises, if you have a couple of fucking functional neurons in your brain, that should raise a very, very large red flag in your mind. Why are the women getting to sit in the shadows under the fucking umbrella of anonymity, while these two men, who have not been convicted of anything, they haven't even had their day in court? Why are they, having their fucking arses stuck out in public, and these other folk Nobody knows who they are. Well, here's the interesting thing. You see these women accusers who nobody knows who they are. Nobody knows who they are. Here's the interesting thing. You know who's speaking on their behalf? You'll never guess. That's right. The prosecutors are speaking on their behalf. Nothing could go wrong there, folks. You know, there mightn't be the possibility of a wee bit of the old corruption there. Oh no, that wouldn't happen. That wouldn't happen. You know, when someone speaks on your behalf, there's no ability there to omit the truth, to manipulate the truth, or to fabricate the truth. No, not at all. No. Because you know what I've noticed, folks? You see the women who are accusing Andrew and Tristan Tate of all of these disgusting things, they are being spoken on behalf of by the prosecutors. Now, this then raises a very interesting question. If these accusations are truly founded upon solid evidence, well, why not just allow the women to speak freely? Why are they remaining under the veil of anonymity? Would it not actually give more credibility to your case if you had real people, real women, in front of the camera, you know, explaining what it is that has happened? Well, you see, the reason why you wouldn't want that is because, you know, let's say, hypothetically speaking here, let's say some of these women don't exist. Well, how can you get a woman who doesn't exist to appear in front of a camera in public to explain what happened? You can't really do that. Now, let's say the women do exist. Well, what happens if what it is they are accusing Andrew and Tristan Tate of didn't actually happen? And if you were to put the public spotlight on them, the narrative that they would be spouting would fall apart and crumble very quickly. So what would be your best play on the chessboard? If you have an agenda, let's say you have an agenda, and part of your agenda is to get the Tate brothers thrown in prison. Let's just speculate wildly. If your agenda is to have the Tate brothers thrown in prison, the last thing you're going to do is allow your accusers to face public scrutiny. Because you know what would happen then? You would get people like the old Bandido cross-examining what they're saying, how they're saying it, what their body language is like, what they look like, and what their past history is like. So if you had a very vested interest in ensuring that Andrew and Tristan Tate go to prison, the last thing you would do is reveal who the accusers are. And the exact thing you would do is have a prosecutor speak on their behalf. That is the exact thing you would do. Which tells me all I need to know. Folks, it goes without saying, when we pass the Andrew and Tristan Tate case through a logic analysis, it becomes oh so clear what the agenda is at play here. If the accusers are not made public, then that tells you that there is a big arsed agenda behind that. Because as I've said, if the system is truly just and fair, you would either make accusers and accused all anonymous until a verdict is raised or achieved or reached, or you would have both accusers and accused both made public, because that would be fair and just. That's not what we're seeing here. And you need to ask yourself why. Why? Why would one party, the accused, be made public? And why would the other party, the accusers, remain anonymous? Folks, fuck me. Look, in order to do an analysis of logic, you need to go to both sources. Okay? We've established that. I've repeated myself over and over. Why you need to go directly to the sources. But what happens if one of the sources has been eliminated from the equation? Well, all of a sudden your analysis has to change a little now. Because one of the sources isn't available. You only have one source. The Andrew and Tristan Tate source. That's the only version you're allowed to get. Because that's the direct source. I don't want the prosecutor's interpretation. This is no different to me getting an interpretation from a political commentator or a mainstream media outlet or an alternative media outlet. No. I don't want a prosecutor speaking on behalf of the women who are accusing Andrew and Tristan Tate. No. I want to see them directly. I want to hear them directly, and I want to cross-examine them directly. I don't want my source coming second-hand. And that is exactly what is happening here. And you then need to ask the question, why? This is where your logic analysis naturally leads you. If you've got a couple of functioning neurons in your head, you need to ask yourself, why? Why can we not just hear the women? Because Andrew and Tristan are getting slaughtered out there. Is there any fairness and justice in the system? Any fairness and justice? What about a level playing field for the accused and the accusers? No? We need to ask, obviously, because we don't have all the details. We're just using our logic. We need to ask why. Why would a prosecutor be speaking on behalf of all these women who are accusing Andrew and Tristan of a whole bunch of stuff? Well, the reason why you would do that is because either number one, they don't exist. The women don't exist. That would be number one. You can't have a woman speak in public if she doesn't exist. Or number two, they do exist, but the evidence upon which their allegations or accusations are standing are extremely shaky. And the last thing you would want to do is to send your accusers out into the public sphere to have to face a cross-examination from the public. Because you see, if they did do that, they'd get torn to pieces. The narrative that these women would be spewing would be torn to pieces. It would crumble. It would crumble in comparison to Andrew and Tristan's version. Because remember, how do we get close to the truth here, folks? We need to compare and contrast the accused versions of events and the accuser's versions or version of events. It's only through a comparison and a contrasting analysis that we can sort of orient ourselves and figure, right, well, who appears most credible? Who's most credible? Is it Andrew and Tristan's version or is it the women's version? But what happens if the women, we don't know who they are? Well, now we can't cross-examine them. But Mr. Bandido, but the prosecutor. No, I don't want a prosecutor. That's second-hand information. I don't want the prosecutor's version for the exact same reason that I don't want anybody else's version. This is why we go straight to the source. The prosecutor is going to have his own little biased filter on here with his own little agenda, taking his orders from someone else. I don't want that interpretation. And the fact that that's all that I'm getting tells me all I need to know about Andrew and Tristan Tate's case. Tells me everything I need to know. I don't need evidence anymore. The behavior of the two parties involved, my logic, My fucking sniff test. You know the way we have the sniff test? Whenever I engage in the sniff test, there's only one conclusion that I can come to. When someone conceals the accusers, that tells me they're looking to hide something. What are they looking to hide? If these women were truly abused in the way that they're claiming, that's all right. Let the public hear their story. That'll bring some humanity into it. If the women are telling the truth, don't worry. Their natural body language cues will give off truthful signals. Don't worry, the natural emotionality that comes from, a traumatic past, don't worry, the public will pick up on all of the natural emotionality from the accusers. You don't have to worry about it. What happens if this isn't as organic as it's being presented? Well, then the last thing you would want is to have your accusers out there in public being cross-examined. Folks, this is exactly what happened with Conor McGregor here in Ireland. Now look, some of you may not like Conor McGregor. That's fine. But Conor McGregor had a civil trial, a civil case, where some chick, I don't know who she is, I can't even remember her name, but she was made public. And so, you know what I was able to do in that case? I was able to analyse Conor McGregor, because I know he's the accused. I was able to analyse Conor McGregor in civil court. I was able to listen to what he said, analyse his delivery and body language, look at his face, look at the cover of his book, and run a background check on Conor McGregor. Great. She was also made public. And folks, fascinating. Let me tell you, within about 2 minutes of looking and listening to this gal, I was looking and going, she's lying. I'm getting cues of deception. Her story doesn't make sense. She had to get in front of people and explain. This is difficult to do, folks, if you're lying. You see, when you're a liar, it's very hard when the cameras are on you and everyone's listening and watching. If you're lying, you have to be very skilled. Very skilled. And this chick was not very skilled. And so you know the logical conclusion that I came to? Yeah. Did Conor McGregor bang her? Yeah, he did. Absolutely. Was it consensual? Yeah, I believe it was. I think she was perfectly happy with the sexual encounter. No problem. Right. You can come at Conor McGregor morally. You can say that he cheated on his wife. No problem. If you want to take the moral high ground, I personally don't. I couldn't give a fuck. Think of that what you wish. But to me, I don't care if Conor McGregor cheated on his wife, honestly. Men do it all the time. He's a multi-millionaire, high-status male. Okay, it's happened throughout human natural history for as long as humans have been living. I don't think it's an indictment of him being a bad person at all. So, right, but you may take the moral high ground, you may be all into your Christianity, and you may think X, Y, and Z about, when the ring gets put on your finger and, till death do us apart and all this fucking crap. I don't believe in marriage. I don't like any of that. So, naturally, I don't have any desire to take the moral high ground. But some people will. Some people will say morally it was the wrong thing for Conor McGregor to do. Did Conor McGregor commit a crime? No! And it's laughable, folks, because the case didn't even make it to criminal court. Before we even get into it, she's accusing him of rape, sexual assault. Well, if it was truly rape and sexual assault, and your evidence was so strong, then why was it not in criminal court? Why was it in civil court? Because it didn't meet the necessary threshold for credible evidence to take it to criminal court, but it met the threshold for civil court. In other words, Conor McGregor was stitched up. Right. That's what it looked like to me. It looked like his reputation was dragged through the gutter. I don't believe for a second that he raped this gal. Not at all. And when I cross-examined her, going through the 4 little points that we've talked about over and over here, within a couple of minutes, it was like, oh, this is trash. It's not a criminal court, it's a civil court. That already tells me enough. Clearly the evidence isn't strong enough. Otherwise, Conor McGregor would be in criminal court, facing time in prison. If Conor McGregor truly raped someone, sexually assaulted them, fuck me. That's a criminal trial he should be on. Facing time in prison. Is that what happened? No. Civil court. In other words, our chick here was looking a handout. She gets her handout, and then whoever her paymaster is, who is giving her the handout, he gets to, drag McGregor's name through the mud. Because, it was just a coincidence that you see around that time, McGregor had aspirations of running for President of Ireland. Isn't that funny? Coincidence. So just as McGregor's starting to get political, boom, civil court. So he has to basically hand out a bit of money to this chick. Look, I was able to do a logic analysis. Conor McGregor, in my opinion, whenever I looked at that gal, she had no credibility. Zero credibility. Her narrative and account didn't add up. And you see, when I was watching her explain what she deemed to have happened, she had zero credibility. It didn't pass the sniff test. But what's the problem with Andrew and Tristan Tate? The problem is the prosecutors are withholding the direct source of information that we need, which is the women. Now, why would they do that? Why would they have the prosecutor? Anonymity. It's a very traumatic time for the women. Very traumatic time. Victims. Victims? They haven't been convicted of anything. They're not fucking victims. They are alleged victims. Fuck me. It's very traumatic for them. Oh, and what? It's not traumatic for Andrew and Tristan Tate. It's not unpleasant for them having heinous charges attached to their name and reputation. What? So it's not hard for them? Where's the justice and the fairness? Should everybody not be made public? Or everyone's made anonymous? One or the other. You can't have your cake and eat it, but that's exactly what's happening. And the fact that that is how this is set up tells me all I need to know. Now, I could be wrong. Maybe Andrew and Tristan Tate are these vicious criminal masterminds that have a sex trafficking network set up across Europe and the US and the UK. Maybe that's true. Well, you know what? Based on what I can see at the moment, the fact that the accusers cannot be seen, they are faceless, nameless individuals. For all we know, they mightn't even be real. Because we have to take the word of who? Whose word do we have to take? That's right. The prosecutor's word. Folks, fuck me. Work back up the chain. Who does the prosecutor work for? Do you think he's an independent fucking prosecutor who doesn't have a paymaster? Of course he has a paymaster. He's being instructed to do what he's doing by someone. Who would be instructing the prosecutor? Well, work your way back up the chain. And you know where you end up at? You end up at the government. You end up at the big club, basically. We did a show on the big club, episode 42. It's their big club, not yours. I would encourage you to watch it. We talk all about the big club. The politicians, the bankers, the fucking asset managers, the enforcers of the law, the lawmakers. They all form part of the big club. This prosecutor is in the big club. And he is taking his orders from someone who sits above him in the big club's dominance hierarchy. And that prosecutor is being told what to do. Now, the next thing that we need to do is engage our logic again. If this is coming from the big club, which is basically, if we're just going to use conventional terms, let's just call it the government. Okay, let's just call it the government. I like to say a big club, but let's just say the government because everybody understands what that means. If Andrew Tate's position is contradicting that of the government's, in other words, if Andrew Tate's presence on the internet is causing the government's narrative to be undermined, what do you think the government is going to want to do with Andrew Tate and Tristan Tate? Andrew and Tristan Tate have a narrative that's in direct competition with the government's narrative. And what happens whenever you have the government's narrative being undermined? Well, what do you think's going to happen? Do you think the government's just going to say, yeah, free open competition, free speech? That's what we want here. The free expression and circulation of ideas. No, that is not going to happen because if the government's agenda is being undermined, that means the people who are in the government are losing competitive chips on the table. They are being outcompeted and they don't want to be outcompeted. So what do? Well, who's my competitor? These two, Andrew and Tristan Tate. Right. Well, we need to find a way to turn the tables our way and start out competing them. Well, what tools do we have at our disposal? Oh yeah, we have the law. You know, we tried the sort of social media censoring thing. Yeah, we tried that. Didn't really work. So now we're going to use the law. That's going to be our next weapon. And if you're going to use the law as a weapon, me speculating here, if you were to use the law as a weapon, well, that's going to involve you using prosecutors and judges. They are part of the law. And who is it that's giving us the second-hand account from the women accusers? That's right. The prosecutor. No conflict of interest there. It's not as if the prosecutor's going to go against his paymaster. Do you think that's likely? Do you think the prosecutor's thinking, yeah, fair and due process. Yeah, the person who pays my bills wants me to do X, but I'm going to do Y because that's fair and due process. Yeah, that's not going to cut it. You're going to get booted out of the club. And you're going to have a headache as well because you've went against the agenda of the club. No. Folks, we then need to analyse the credibility of the government because that's the narrative here. The government, through its prosecutors, is speaking on behalf of the accusers. That's what's happening. Now, what is it that we wanted to do? Well, what we wanted to do here on the show is go to the sources directly. We wanted to go straight to Andrew and Tristan, which I have done, and then I wanted to go straight to the women who are accusing Andrew and Tristan, and I wanted to cross-examine them. But that's been taken out of my hands because the women are, hiding in under the umbrella of anonymity. So now I don't have the direct source of the accusers. What have I been given instead? Yeah, I've been given a second-hand source called a prosecutor. Well, who does the prosecutor work on behalf of? Well, that's right, the government. Okay, so now I have a second-hand account of the accusers and their accusations. Well, what's the credibility of the government? Because if the prosecutor works for the government, we now need to assess, well, how likely is it that the government's telling us the truth? How likely is it that the government and the prosecutor and the legal system is representing the accusations of these women fairly? Let's do a background check on the government. On the UK government, for example. Has the UK government ever told a few porky pies? Few porky pies? Has the UK government... has the UK government ever omitted a bit of the truth? Manipulated a bit of the truth? Or fabricated some truth of its own? Let's take a recent example that I like to remind you all about. Remember 2020? happened in 2020? Ooh. Remember the virus? The big scary virus that took over the world and forced us all to double mask and meticulously get 2 meters apart from everyone, let grandma die in the nursing home, and then, oh, better still, the cherry on top. Remember the big virus in 2020? Remember the government, through its NHS, told you and I that the only way to draw an end to this deadly and dangerous virus and pandemic. You remember what the solution was? That's right. You had to do that. Remember we were told that back in 2020 and 2021? Remember they told us the science is clear. The chief medical officer has analysed the science. The chief medical officer obviously works on behalf of the government, of course. The NHS has done the research. It's clear that when you inject yourself with stuff to combat COVID, that is how you end the pandemic. Well, hasn't that aged beautifully? You know, folks, we could keep going. Is that an example of where, was the truth slightly omitted during 2020 and 2021, 2022? Remember, actually, do you not remember that? Remember the UK government, Boris Johnson, had a party? Do you remember that? Remember he had a party while all of us were locked down. Businesses closed, economic disaster. Remember when we were all locked down, fearing for our lives about this virus? And Boris and the lads were having a party. Do you think that ever so slightly undermined their credibility as a source of truthful information and as a source for presenting the raw, unfiltered facts of reality? Ever so slightly. It ever so slightly undermined their credibility. Fuck me, folks. The prosecutor works on behalf of the government. That means the government is concealing the identity of these women. And that means the government is speaking on behalf of these women. We then need to ask the question, well, what's the track record of the government for telling the truth? So now it becomes a question of, let's analyse the government, because that's all we have. We haven't been provided with the direct source, unfortunately. I don't know who these women are. I've no idea. I don't know what they look like. I don't know what they sound like. I don't know what their own individual accusation is composed of. I don't know, because they haven't been made public. Nobody knows who they are. They are faceless and nameless. So all I can now do is take the prosecutor's word for it. Who does the prosecutor work for? Well, he works for the government. And if he works for the government, well, then I need to use my logic and say, well, how truthful has the government been in the past with regards to the presentation of the facts of reality? Folks, this is how I do a logic analysis. And when you do a logic analysis, what you'll notice is you don't really need all the nitty-gritty details. You just have to be able to go directly to the sources. And if one of the sources isn't being made available, but the other is, well, then that tells you something extremely interesting about the motives behind what you are seeing with regards to Andrew and Tristan Tate. Make of that what you wish. Now, to conclude the show, folks, we're at 2 hours and 9 minutes. Let me take a drink of water. The Bandido's rambling too much, is he? Now, we're almost there. But there's a very important thing that we need to finish on here. Because I'm a fair man. I'm a fair man. There are a whole bunch of people that may be looking at what's happening to Andrew and Tristan Tate, and they will say it's unfair. Now, based on what we've talked about thus far, you can definitely see why people would say that. Absolutely. I think people have a very good argument for saying that what is happening to Andrew and Tristan Tate is unfair. Absolutely. No problem. But we need to be honest, we need to be professional here when we're analysing this. What do I mean by being honest and professional? Andrew and Tristan have had many opportunities to stand down. They have been given many opportunities to stand down. What do I mean by stand down? What I mean is Andrew and Tristan have been given the heads up that if they continue to say what they're saying online and behave the way they're behaving, continue to run their online school, university, if you continue to do all this, you're going to have trouble. Andrew and Tristan were given the heads up on this, and they decided to run at the fire. They decided to run at the gunfire. It's not as if, folks, because we need to be honest here, and if I were speaking to Andrew and Tristan Tate, I would have no problem saying this to their faces, and I think they'd agree. Andrew and Tristan, they weren't just attacked out of nowhere. This just didn't happen one day. It's not as if just one day, but Jesus, there we go. Human trafficking charges out of nowhere. No, that didn't happen. Andrew and Tristan were getting warnings. It's like, fellas, if you keep doing this, the big club and the governments that are involved in the big club were telling them, fellas, you're tramping on our narrative. You're tramping and, pissing all over our agenda. This isn't good for us. And we're telling you that if you keep doing this, you're going to have trouble. So, what did Andrew and Tristan do? Well, they took the feedback, they took the multiple warnings, and they ran at the gunfire anyway. So, look, it's very easy to call the UK government a piece of shit. It's very easy to say the Romanians are corrupt, they are a piece of shit. It's very easy to look at the US government and say they are a piece of shit because they're remanding them in federal custody, in solitary confinement. It's very easy to say that. But we need to be fair. And Andrew says it in his own words. He said it in his own words. He knew, he chose this path. He decided to run at the guns that were raised and pointing at him. And he was told by the people holding the guns that they're going to fire. But Andrew and Tristan decided to run at them anyway. Now, that is why we need to be fair here. These governments didn't just attack the big club, the prosecutors, call them whatever you want. The accusers, who one could argue are being paid off by the powers to be. These legal troubles didn't come out of nowhere. They were given the heads up that this was going to happen if they continued with their behaviour. Now, what can we learn from this? Well, folks, look, Andrew and Tristan clearly have a certain personality type. They're very stubborn. What does that mean? When we say someone's stubborn, that is code for they are very disagreeable. They are big alphas, they're big disagreeable, status climbing, hierarchy ascending alphas. And in order to be a big status seeking, hierarchy ascending alpha in the world of business, you need to be disagreeable. You need to have a streak of narcissism running through you. Now, I'm not saying Andrew and Tristan are bad people at all, but I'm disagreeable. Like, I have a disagreeable narcissistic streak running through me. Absolutely. Why the fuck do you think I dress like this? Who the fuck dresses like this? Really? Most people look at me and they think I'm a prick. They'll look at me down the town and they'll say, who the fuck does he think he is? Fucking striding around there. And yeah, whenever I walk around, I straighten myself up and I walk with confidence. But people think I'm a prick a lot of the time. But I do. I have a disagreeable little narcissistic streak running through me. It doesn't mean I'm a bad person. But what it does mean is that I have the ability to basically disregard the fucking opinions of other people. The opinions of other people who don't matter to me don't influence me a lot. And it's the same with Andrew and Tristan. Andrew and Tristan have a disagreeable streak in them. A stubborn streak. We can use different synonyms to basically say the same thing. And it is this disagreeability and this stubbornness which has basically got them into the predicament that they're in, because they had multiple opportunities to stand down. Now, notice the words I'm using. I'm not saying sell out. No, you don't have to sell out. You don't have to put a fucking dress on and start pretending to be a woman and start endorsing the trannies. No, you don't have to do that. But you can definitely stand down. Standing down is not the same as selling out. People conflate the two. People think that if you stand down, that you're a sellout. You're not. A sellout is whereby you start endorsing and promoting things that you don't believe in. A sellout is when you start to actively propagate the agenda of someone else, an agenda that you don't believe in. Like, that's a sellout. Because you're not doing what you truly want to do in this life. You're not being true to yourself. In other words, you're selling your soul to someone else. And by selling your soul, you take on their agenda and their narrative. And now you are like a little minion, a little mouthpiece for someone else's agenda. That's a sellout. Standing down is different. Andrew and Tristan had the opportunity to both sell out and stand down. So yeah, they were given, according to Andrew and Tristan, they were given an offer of $50 million on two different occasions. Okay, in order for them to start propagating the agenda of the person who's paying them the $50 million. Now, if they had they accepted the $50 million, yeah, that would have been selling out, because now they are promoting an agenda that's not their own. But that's only one part of the story. They were also given the opportunity to stand down. What does it mean to stand down in the case of Andrew and Tristan? Yeah, let's just cool down the way in which you're saying things. You can still say what you're saying, but you're going to modify your language. Modify your language a bit. Don't make it so inflammatory. Focus a little bit more on some of these other things. Now, some people would say to me, that's selling out. That's not selling out. That's feedback from your environment. Two different things. Andrew and Tristan got feedback from the big club. The big club has more force than them. The big club can impart more violence upon Andrew and Tristan than Andrew and Tristan can on them. And at the end of the day, folks, when it comes down to it, the rubber hits the road in life, when we're talking about violence. Whoever can be most violent wins, really. Whoever can impose their will the most wins. And to do that, you need an army, and you need a military, and you need big weapons and big bombs. Andrew and Tristan don't have that. So this was a fight that they were never going to win. Never going to win. But they charged at the gunfire anyway. And they were given the opportunity to stand down. They could have made their money some other way. They could have taken the school down. They could have modified their little online university. They could have made adjustments. It doesn't mean selling out. It just means taking the feedback that you're getting, because you have to analyze this. Can I win this battle? No, you can't. But if you're disagreeable and stubborn, what do? You charge at the gunfire. And if I were in Andrew and Tristan's position, I would have stood down. Now, some people will call me a sellout for doing that. No, I'm not going to start propagating someone else's agenda. No, I'm not going to do that. But what I will do is I will modify. I will modify because my environment is telling me that very powerful entities that are going to beat me in combat are now encroaching upon my life. That's feedback. Now you have a decision to make. Well, do I just plow on and be stubborn and do what it is that I want to do independent, or do I take the feedback and make the adjustments? It's no different to sport, folks. If you go out in a boxing match, fuck me, let's say you have a strategy prepared for your boxing match. And let's say you go out and all of a sudden your opponent starts to do something that you weren't expecting. That's feedback. That's feedback. So you now have two options. You either plow ahead with your pre-planned strategy, in other words, you be stubborn and you just do what you were going to do anyway, or you adjust, you modify. In other words, in our boxing example, you are standing down. And what do I mean by standing down? You're not giving up, but you're standing down from your initial strategy. You're basically going to say to your coach, no, I'm not doing that. I'm not going to go ahead with that. Why would I do that? It's not working. We're at round 6 and I'm getting beaten to a pulp. So I'm going to stand down from that strategy. The strategy's here. I'm here. I'm standing down. I'm looking. I'm going to look for something else. I'm going to modify in some way. You thought this was the apex strategy. I don't think it is. So I need to step back. I need to stand down from this strategy and build up some other strategy that basically surpasses it. And that's what Andrew and Tristan had the ability to do. They had the ability to stand down, reassess, look at their options, and then build a different strategy that surpasses their previous one, but without attracting the heat of the big club. They decided not to do that. And that's on them. They have to take responsibility for it. So I can totally acknowledge that how they are being treated is unfair. But I could take that line of argumentation. I could argue that very easily. That the system isn't fair. It's unjust. Laws are just being changed fluidly, in a fluid way, so as to suit the government's agenda. Yeah, I could say that. But, to be fair, they were warned multiple times. They were warned multiple times, and they decided to be stubborn. And they decided, I'm going to go straight at the Kraken. You know, the Kraken has its tentacles lifted up. It's got its mouth opened. You know, I'm going to go straight at it. Okay. Well, you know, we can't start lamenting the fact that you get crushed into a pulp when the Kraken closes its mouth if you decide to run at it. Need to be fair here. And that's why I want to tease apart the difference. Because I hear a lot of people say, well, Tate didn't want to sell out. He didn't need to sell out. Remember, go back and listen to what I said selling out is. Selling out is propagating someone else's agenda that you don't believe in. It's propagating a narrative, promoting a narrative that you don't believe in. That's the definition of selling out. You've sold your soul. You've given yourself away to someone else. Andrew and Tristan didn't need to sell out. They just had to step down. And you see, when you step down, you can reassess. You can recalibrate. And what you can actually do is, when you step down, when you reassess and recalibrate, you might actually come up with a better life strategy that actually exceeds the previous strategy you had, but without all the heat from the government and the legal system. You can totally do that. Absolutely. But they decided not to do that. It's exactly like the boxing fight. if your strategy isn't working, you need to sit on your stool and you need to step down. You need to step down from that strategy for a period of time. You just have to do it. You can't just keep going. And the last thing you want to do is to get erratic and fucking go up here and start doing some mad nonsense in the ring. You might get knocked out then. No. Stand down. Take a few rounds. You know, you're gonna have to modify something here. And in the process of modification, you're gonna have to make sure that you don't get knocked out. So you stand down and you buy yourself time. You buy yourself time and you take a bit of heat off yourself. And you reassess and recalibrate. Andrew and Tristan decided not to do that. And they have to take responsibility. The buck stops with them. Because the last thing I would want to do is come on here and do that fucking stereotypical thing that everyone does. Oh, the government, piece of shit government, blah, blah. Folks, you all know what the governments are. You all know what they stand for. And in the case of Andrew and Tristan, they told them what they were going to do to them before they did it. It's not as if they just did it one day. Andrew got the warning signals and he decided to ignore them and plough on at the gunfire. And now he's in a pickle, and so's Tristan. Now look, that's just me being fair. That's just me giving a balanced argument here. We can learn a heck of a lot from Andrew and Tristan's case, not just from an analytical standpoint about how to deduce what's true and what isn't, but we can also be professionals here too and acknowledge that Andrew and Tristan had the ability to step down. Not sell out, but step down and give themselves a chance to recover and come up with a different strategy without bringing all the heat of the government and the legal system onto them.